Hello, Pottery Online. Thank you so much for the wonderful artwork that I see in last week's discussion. I am still catching up to you in grading. I was also in a class this week on quality matters that really the homework took me for a loop. So hopefully by tomorrow, everyone should have feedback and your grades on your plate of honor. It was really wonderful to see your creativity and that process. I hope that the process discussions were helpful. It seems like we knew that those were coming, and it's a great way to practice critique and use it in a very productive and constructive way because we're still finishing the piece. So you still have time to kind of think about those things, and hopefully it's helpful to kind of have some folks to give you some suggestions. So I can't believe how fast time is moving. We're at the last module, and I'm really, really sad because this has been going quite wonderful. My goodness, here we are. So the last module is on site-specific works of art. And these are works of art which are created for a specific space. And what I would really like for you to do is get creative with what you've got. So even through COVID, it might be around the house. It might be your yard or your neighborhood. Get creative. And of course, think safe during COVID and things like that. But be creative with your resources and really kind of think also about your inspiration. That might also guide and determine where this dwelling is, or who this dwelling is for. I want you to be really, really creative and connect that and kind of develop a story with the piece, very much like Charles Simmons. So he is our artist of inspiration this week, and he creates these wonderful tiny dwellings that very much remind me of Native American cliff dwellings, the Anasazi in New Mexico, and all these adobe homes, ancient adobe homes that are throughout the Midwest. And his work is really, really fascinating. So the reading and viewing assignments will take you through the work of Charles Simmons, some inspiration like Slinkachoo, who I just found out by chatting with some of my artist friends. And as Slinkachoo's work is very similar in that it's site-specific, but just a very different aesthetic. And also kind of using social media to share art. There's more information about site-specific installation. This is a very contemporary form of art and media of expression, and there's some really fascinating artists there. My goal is to provide you with lots of different ideas, lots of different possibilities, and hopefully those will spark some ideas for you. So I would suggest to have your sketchbook, maybe take some notes, maybe sketch some ideas as you are watching these videos. At the end, there are some demonstration videos on how to create a house with clay and how to use slabs to do that. I would also suggest that as you're building and constructing, you may want to refer back to some of the other videos on finishing and refining your pieces. I sent one out in an announcement a few weeks ago. The more complex the piece is, the drying time may cause the piece to crack. Clay shrinks as it dries. So if you're attaching pieces of clay at different times, they're drying at different rates. And as they're shrinking and expanding at different rates, that's when they crack apart. So you want to slow down the drying time. You can use a plastic bag or plastic and cover the piece and leave just a little bit open, so just a little bit of air is coming to the piece. You don't want to leave it wide open and let it dry quickly. That is where some cracks will happen. And as you're getting really detailed and sculpting in the house, you may be, having some very delicate pieces or things that may break. And in wrapping the piece in plastic and letting it dry slowly will help. That will definitely help. So with this piece, you can also use recycled materials. You can use plastic bottles, you can use cardboard. One of the great things about air dry clay is that you don't have to fire it. So you can have things like cardboard or even pieces of wire that create an armature. An armature is something that supports the clay. So if I wanted to sculpt very tall and I didn't want it to just fall over, I could use a piece of wire or even a cardboard as an armature to hold the piece up as I'm sculpting. And if things do break, because it's air dry clay, you can glue it back together. You can glue it back together and paint over it, but be careful. As the clay gets dry, it's at its most fragile. So very, very delicate. But you can kind of reattach pieces. And you're also fantastic. A lot of you have already looked at the reading and viewing materials because you're all such wonderful students. And after you have gone through that, then you start the thinking process. And for this piece, it is that creative process that's most important. The biggest goals for this assignment are: 1, it should be site-specific. 2, of course, it needs to be a tiny dwelling, a tiny house sculpted out of clay. And I would like to see you use some advanced processes, things like slabs, constructing lots of details. So this should really be a very detailed, I guess kind of your best piece of the quarter. Reflect back on the things that you've learned from pinch pots, from recycled and alternative clay, from working with a mold, from working with paint and color and design. Think back, all the things that you've learned, put them into this final piece. The time that you invest is also always very important for me. I want to see that you're working on the process throughout these 2 weeks and that you're reflecting, and things that aren't going well, you are problem solving and finding ways to creatively adapt and adjust. It takes time to do that. So it's very important not to save the piece for the end and rush. It always shows. And it usually shows in a very bad way. So your timing is really important. And for me, it's much more important that you've spent time on your creative process than you arrive at a perfect destination. Because this is a class, it's about your learning, and it's about how you're growing, your growth and your progress. So making a great piece every time, that may not include any growth or progress, because you might be doing things you already know how to do well. So, for example, if you create a piece and you've worked on it throughout and you've invested that time and it still did not come together the way you like it, you can actually still get an A in my class, because I'm looking at all of those little pieces in your grade and not just the final piece. So I hope that helps you to kind of understand my grading and the goal. So the goal is definitely to spend at least 5 hours a week, problem solve, get creative, site specific, where's it going to be, who's it for, what's this tiny house all about, really get creative with it, and then go with it. I'd also really like for everyone, I use feedback individually, so you may not see big feedback from me like to everybody, but you'll see it in your grade book, okay? So for the sketchbook and also for the process critique, I'm sharing some content there, so make sure you're looking back at the grade book for your feedback from me. And after you turned in the sketchbook, once you start working, take a picture, maybe when you're about halfway along, wherever you are, you know, in the process, take a picture. We've got our small groups here. Share your process, share your thoughts and ideas, and share a question, something that you're stuck on or something that you need help with. And you should be approaching that halfway point sometime this weekend. That's due on February the, I forget which day. Let me go back. Our process critiques are due February 28th. February 28th. And then next week, March the 7th, all the way, so we have about 2 weeks from now, okay, March the 7th, the final project is due. I would recommend that you, on your calendar, given your schedule, give yourself 4 work sessions. Some time to plan in the sketchbook, some time to experiment with sculpting, exploring where it's going to be, and then, of course, the actual sculpting and then detailing. It's usually best to do those in 2 days. And that will also help keep the piece from cracking and make sure the piece is structurally sound. So in my first sitting, I usually like to make sure the piece is sound and together and it's not going to collapse and fall apart. So I kind of work on the inside and putting it together and things. And then my next sitting, I get into details. And so kind of plan that time, and then you'll submit your final image. Make sure it's visible and embedded. I don't download anything. Everything must be visible in Canvas. And also include your reflection, what you learn, what creative problem solving maybe you worked around, and at least 2 critiques for other people. So look at other people's work and compose a critique, something positive, something constructive, and also include the elements of art and principles of design in your critique. Your critique should be much more than, great job, I really like it, high five, that's awesome. I mean, you can include that. That's a great way to start. And you do want to share positive feedback so that we're all supporting each other. But you want to dig a little deeper. What do you see in regards to the elements of art and the principles of design? And that really helps the artist to understand, what does the viewer see? Because we all have our original ideas and intentions, but those can be very different from what people see and interpret when they look at our artwork. So I hope all this is helpful, and I hope you have fun with this project. Please let me know if you have any questions or you need any help. I've got time to do some Zoom sessions, and I've got my clay and things like that, so I can always kind of look at your work and try to give you some advice, you know, very direct. And take good care of yourselves. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.